Hello, 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 my lovely galactic listeners far and wide. This is Kristine McPartlin, and I'm very excited to welcome you to a very special episode of Mind the Force, a nerdy podcast about Star Wars and mental health. We are on episode 8, which I'm very excited about. I'm sure you're excited about it too. And we're bringing you a very special one off episode celebrating, drum roll, it's Star Wars Podcast Day special. Yes. So, February 7th was the 25th anniversary of the very first Star Wars podcast. It was a group out of Salt Lake City launched the podcast, well, what would be considered the podcast format today, launched a show called Jedi Talk. And that was really where it all started, which is pretty cool. Now, 25 years on, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of Star Wars podcasts around the world, broadcast in English, Spanish, a variety of languages over all the cultures that Star Wars has touched, which I think is super beautiful. I think anything that permeates a variety of cultures and really just touches humanity across the board is beautiful. And I think that's the beautiful thing about fandom culture in general, whether you're looking at Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or Doctor Who or anything. That's the beautiful part about it. It doesn't matter where you are or what walk of life that you come from, you can absorb this content of movies and books and music and comics and whatever it is, whatever format that fandom is coming in, and we can all find common ground on it and our love for it. And I think that is really beautiful, really beautiful. And I'm very excited to be a part of this. I was invited by Daniel of Star Wars Podcast Day, Instagram and Facebook, to make a pod in honor of this particular day. And I've decided to not only do a shout out, but a whole little solo episode. So you're just getting me today for a little while. And I thought it'd be a nice time to chat and tell you about myself and about why I started this podcast and kind of my inspiration for the podcast. If you listen to the early edits of episode 1, then you've kind of maybe gotten a little bit of this story. That intro now no longer exists because sometimes you got to go back and edit. um, but I would love to share this little journey with you guys. So I guess I want to start out with how I fell in love with Star Wars. Maybe you've heard me talk about this on other episodes, that I'm a very late bloomer, so to speak, when it comes to Star Wars. I I first watched The Mandalorian. Yeah, that's the timeline we're working on. I watched The Mandalorian at the start of the 2020 pandemic when it was first coming out week by week, and really liked it. Really, really enjoyed it. And if obviously you've seen the first season of The Mandalorian, you know that it really is a nice standoff story. Like, it's a standalone story. If you know things about Star Wars, it makes it even more awesome, but you can really come into it with no knowledge and just kind of enjoy the story. This bounty hunter kind of like father and son, like lion cub camaraderie, love relationship story and action packed and all that. So I watched The Mandalorian, really enjoyed it. And I'm kind of sitting at home, working from home, and I was living in Brooklyn at the time. And my roommate was also a Star Wars fan, or she was already a Star Wars fan, grew up with the prequels and the originals and all the movies. And I was thinking, you know what? I finally have a lot of time on my hands. I should watch those Star Wars movies. Always meant to get around to them and just never made the time. And now I suddenly had a lot of time. and my roommate was totally game to watch them with me, and watched episodes 1 through 9 and loved them, absolutely loved them, and we'll get into more of my personal thoughts in a little bit. And then I was inclined to start the shows, and so really picked up Clone Wars, and by the time I got to Clone Wars, I was just completely turned out. I was in tears at the end of the show. I thankfully came in at a really beautiful time. I think the time I came into Star Wars now is such a gift because there is so much content. Um, Matt, my Anakin co-host Matt, he always talks about how he saw the movies as a kid in theaters, and that through the late 80s to in the 90s, there was no movie content. There was no shows. All they had were novels and comic books, and that's what they survived on. And so to have this huge breadth of content to enjoy is really, really just wonderful. I think it's a beautiful time to come into the Star Wars fandom. Um, and as I said, I got to the end of Clone Wars and was just completely in love. Then I went on to Rebels, binged through Rebels so fast because it was so excellent. Shout out to the Ahsoka Vader lightsaber battle because that's an emotional experience in and of itself. And just kind of kept going, kind of kept going. Bad Batch came out not too long after that. Um, Season 2 of The Mandalorian came out, then you had Book of Boba Fett. I was able to enjoy the, highly anticipated wait for Ahsoka, which was cool, and things like Visions and all these, like, little one-offs that came out were just really lovely to enjoy, and then, of course, I started reading the novels, and I got the Marvel Unlimited app so that I can enjoy the comic book content, and it was just such a universe. Such a world that just it goes on and on and on. And isn't that awesome? Isn't that amazing? Now, I took some notes here as I was doing a little prep for this. And I guess a few things I wanted to tell you about my love of Star Wars. So first, my favorite thing about Star Wars, I want to say, is all of the cultural inspiration across Star Wars. I kind of love how it pulls from so many different religions and myths and traditions to kind of make this very almost realistic lore, this very mythical world that is so grounded in reality with progress and technology and different civilizations across different worlds, different kinds of cities and terrains and peoples. But it also comes a lot of influence from Christianity, from Judaism, from Taoism and Buddhism, and that the world that George Lucas has created really brings together all these beautiful belief systems and concepts and ways of life that just make, I mean, for me, what for me is a very almost realistic universe. Um, I think that it's a very beautiful and uniting thing. I think anyone can find a little something in Star Wars that they love, just with all the emotion and the high drama and the action and just the thought-provoking nature of it. I think it can make you feel so much and can really make you think, and I think that any kind of fictional content that can bring forth that kind of emotion is one, not only well written with excellent character development, but just thoughtful. Just thoughtfully made. You can see the passion behind the story. You can see the passion behind the longevity and the long game. The really long game of just this bigger world. I think world building is a skill that we've seen that we see across very few geniuses throughout time, because you have the Tolkiens, you have the R.R. Martins, you have the um why am I spacing on her name? She wrote Harry Potter. It'll come to me in a second and I'll feel stupid. Um but you know what I mean. Just that big picture world building. And I think George Lucas is just top of that list. And of course, now passing the torch to Dave Filoni. Shout out Dave. I look forward to his meeting one day. And it's just a beautiful thing. And I think it's one of the best parts about fiction and about escapism and fantasy, that we get to enjoy content like that for a little while outside of ourselves while also seeing parts of ourselves, which is actually an important reason why I started the podcast, and I look forward to sharing that. Another fun thing I wanted to share with you is my favorite Star Wars character. I have also talked about this on the pod. It is none other than Darth Maul, the red-faced, yellow-eyed, horned, double lightsabered, mentally disturbed psychopath that we all know and love. Obviously, if you've only watched the films, then you only know Maul from The Phantom Menace. And that's about it. And that's such a shame because Maul is an absolutely incredible character. I love his character development so much. It's just it's so good. It's like coming in Clone Wars and finding, and his brother Savage finding him down in that pit with the crazy spider legs, which always makes me think of that toy in Toy Story with the doll head and the spider legs. That's Maul down in the pit, if you can have that vision. And how the love of his brother brings him back from the brink of insanity, and then he just has a plan. Oh, I love it. Just the big picture plot of not only like taking over the underground crime syndicate, but then staging the war in Mandalore in order to lure Anakin there because he knows Palpatine's bigger picture, and that if he takes out his old master's new apprentice, that it's going to put a major cog in Palpatine's plan as a big fuck you to him. And just so fascinating. He's of course a tragic character. He's a very tragic character from start to finish. If you have read one of my favorite books, Darth Plagueis, you know that he was literally given to Palpatine, who at the time was a pretty established sociopath, as a way for his mother to save him from enslavement to the Night Sisters of Dathomir, because they took the men of their culture and pretty much they were enslaved to the witches who used the dark side of the force to wield their magic powers. And it's just tragic. It's like, would he have been better off as a slave, or like he was given to Palpatine for protection, but did he did he protect him? He raised him to be an assassin. He raised him to be cold and to hate the Jedi and basically use him. Essentially, he was a puppet. He was a very disposable puppet. And that's very sad. It's very sad. It's a character that clearly never even had the chance to have any kind of like mental or emotional stability. Like the point of him was to be this raging killing machine. And he's just so cheeky. I don't know what it is about him that I just adore. I think his character in Clone Wars was absolutely brilliant. And then coming back in Rebels was just so interesting, like hearing him interact with Ezra and interact with Ahsoka again after everything that happened on Mandalore, which of course didn't happen in any sort of chronological order because chronology doesn't matter in Star Wars. And I don't know, I just enjoy his character. I don't know what it is. Sometimes you love things and you're not sure why, and Maul is up there with that for me. Um, his he I have a nice little bobblehead of him sitting right here next to me and looking at it. Boop, bobble in the head. And I don't know, just someone that brings me a lot of joy. It's a character I look forward to cosplaying one day. That'd be super cool. Involved. It's a plan I have, and it's involved, but oof, one day I can't wait to execute that. Can't wait to pull that off. Um, and I think what also makes me love Maul is I'm very I don't want to say I'm anti Jedi. I find the Jedi quite problematic, as I do with most religions, particularly extremist religions. But religion in general, and I'm sure I'll get into that more in other episodes. And yeah, I just find the Jedi problematic, and I find that the more I learn about the Sith, the more I'm like, "Hmm, that's, not the worst philosophy." Obviously, it's a little egocentric, and there's not a ton of compassion there for other beings, but sometimes the teachings are just kind of like, "Yeah, that makes sense," or "That's straightforward." It's appealing, I don't know why. I don't know, and maybe it's just fun to be bad. Like to do Sith cosplays, it's just fun. You get a cape, everything's red. It's just a good time. I look forward to delving more, I think, into religion and cults as we kind of explore different segments of Mind the Force that will go beyond character retrospectives, which I'm very excitingly developing for you. And I definitely will talk more about my love of the Sith, and we'll talk more maybe about the occult background of the development of the Sith concept. It's all very exciting. It's all very, very exciting. But I did want my listeners to know that I am a self-prescribed Sith. Sith all day, yellow eyes, red lightsabers. Love it. I love all of it. um, as I come to the last few minutes of this very exciting Star Wars Podcast Day special, I want to talk a little bit about why I created this podcast. Obviously, I talked a lot about my love of Star Wars and kind of what drew me to the fandom, but as far as taking the time to make this program and take on this project, um, I was looking for a creative outlet. I'm a very creative person, and you find that as you get older, you have less and less time for your creative outlets, which is the very sad reality of being an adult. I have a longstanding background in theater and music and performance, and so really talking as a platform kind of comes very natural to me, which is nice. And I found that all I wanted to do all the time was talk about Star Wars. Once I love something, I really love it. I'm very predisposed to fandoms. I was a huge Doctor Who fan, or I am still a huge Doctor Who fan. And that was my shit for like 10 years. It's all I wanted to talk about was Doctor Who. And then I got put onto Star Wars, and I'll be honest, Doctor Who's taken a big backseat to that. I don't know what it is about space. I'm definitely a technologist. I'm a progressive human race forward into the stars kind of person. So I think maybe the space fandoms are just kind of my thing. And I just found I wanted to talk about Star Wars all the time because it was so thought provoking. Like the drama and the emotional trauma and the character development and all the feelings. God, I had so many feelings. So many feelings. And I was struggling to find people to talk about it with. And especially people I wanted to talk to about it with. Now through the podcast, I engage with a lot of awesome fans online, and that's a pleasure. It's always such a joy to meet different kinds of people who are into the same shit you're into. And it was a good friend of mine, my friend Frank, shout out Frank, who said that if I wanted to talk about Star Wars all the time, it sounded like I needed a podcast. And I was like, hmm, that's not the worst idea I've ever heard. I was pretty starved for a new creative outlet, and I had been on other people's podcast episodes and had a very good time, and kind of thought, why can't I do that? And I sat on the idea for about a year or so, and not more. It's more like a dream. It wasn't a plan at that point. It was a dream. And once I kind of sat down and decided, you know what, I can do this. Like, how do I turn that dream into a plan? How do I actually list out what I would need to execute this? And I realized that my first thing that I needed was something to bring to the table that wasn't already there. There are so many different kinds of Star Wars podcasts out there. There's, like I said before, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of Star Wars podcasts. And you don't want to make something that's just like what everyone else is doing, because that's not unique. That doesn't have any longevity to it. And so I sat and I thought about, well, if I love Star Wars, what else do I love? Like, what else am I into? And the answer came to me pretty quickly. I am very big into mental health. I am a very big champion of the therapeutic process. I have had a lot of therapy myself, to very positive results and to very healing results. And I love talking about mental health with others. I love talking about my own therapeutic journey and making people comfortable, holding space for people so that they're comfortable to open up if they'd like to, or to have discussion if they'd like to, around mental health and our feelings and our emotional awareness and development. And after a while, kind of thought about how I could find a marriage between these two things. Because I think the first one of the top rules about podcasting that I've learned over the past few months is that you really need to enjoy what you're making. It's quite a hustle. It's quite a grind. And you really, really better fucking enjoy it, because no one's going to sit there and enjoy making it for you. You have to do it all yourself. So you better like it. And the idea grew from there. It was figuring out how I could tie in this fictional fandom with our mental health and our own feelings. And I really thought about how Star Wars made me feel when I started watching it, and just watching Anakin struggle through episodes 2 and 3, and then really running with that, and just imagining like how tortured Vader would have been in his character, and really all the characters across the board, from Ahsoka and her relationship with Vader and the Jedi, and then you have Luke and his abandonment and his journey through the Jedi. You have Obi-Wan. Oh my god, Obi-Wan. And his emotional journey through everything. And just every character just had this story to tell, and I just was so moved by it all. And I realized that maybe others felt that way. That if others were emotionally moved by this content like I was, isn't that something to reflect on? Isn't that worthy of conversation? And and I guess the idea kind of blossomed from there. And I love it. I love it. I love developing different kinds of segments. I'm so excited to share with you guys. I love deep diving on characters I didn't know about. I think that's also a really fun part. Is not only having the characters on deck that we all know and love from the films and from the shows, but also getting more into the novels and getting more into the comic books. Oh my god, the comic books are so good. And there's a endless list of characters, absolutely endless list of characters that only exists in like Legends content. And they're incredible. And they're incredible and they're moving and their stories are beautiful and well developed, and I think it all makes for fascinating conversation. I think it not only brings something different to the table podcast wise, but I think it brings something fresh to the table conversation wise. And I hope that even if one person takes something from this, whether it's maybe learning about a new character or learning something about themselves through the journey of a character, then maybe it will make the very stigmatized conversations around mental health feel a little more accessible. If you can see this emotional trauma in a character and maybe see how they deal with it, or discuss how they might deal with it, then it might make it a little less scary in your own life. Because really, the only way to break the stigma around mental health awareness and conversation is to start the conversation, is to talk about it, is to acknowledge that there is this elephant in the room and that the elephant is important and shouldn't be ignored. And if that conversation can feel more digestible through the lens of fiction, well, isn't that helpful? And I'm not a mental health specialist by any means. My background is extremely different. I have a master's degree in fashion history and textile conservation, which is the bougiest degree you've never heard of, but shout out to all of my fashion history colleagues. You guys rock. But it's just so part of all of us. You have your physical health and you have your mental health, and they're both equally important. They hold hands walking down the street, and if you can't really acknowledge one without the other, at least in my opinion, in my humble civilian, non-professional opinion. It is just as important as your physical health. And that's how this podcast was born. Um, I've said before that it is an incredibly selfish endeavor that I undertake because it's all I want to talk about all day is Star Wars and feelings. And I love it. I really enjoy it. And I hope that you're enjoying the journey with me, and I hope that you stay tuned for where this takes us. I think it'll take us to some exciting corners of the galaxy. And I want to thank Daniel and this wonderful tradition of Star Wars Podcast Day, February 7th. I will definitely be back next year. I enjoyed this very much. This was fun to sit here and just kind of shoot the shit, let you guys get to know me a little better and get to know the pod a little better. I hope everyone is enjoying it so far, and we're in for a ride, people. Stay tuned. Um, on the next episode of Mind the Force, we will be back to our regularly scheduled programming. I hope you enjoyed this special episode, and I look forward to seeing you very soon. I'm Kristine McPartlin, and this has been another episode of Mind the Force. See you soon, and stay mindful.